into another episode of The Grueling Truth, brought to you by Gridiron Mo, a new interactive football app where you get to call what you think the offense or defense should do during a live NFL game and to see what all other fans around the world have called. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. As always, I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I want to welcome in my co-host, Matt Andruscavage.
How's it going tonight, Mike?
All right. How are you doing, Matthew?
I am pretty good. Ready to
roll.
All
right. So we had the idea to do our first ever NBA show. So tonight we are going to do the top 10 teams in NBA history. So what were your criteria? Because we know I have none.
I didn't really have an extensive criteria. It was kind of based on, some of it was dominance in the regular season, dominance in the playoffs, and probably just a mixture of, how deep was this roster and how would it match up against other teams on the list.
All right. We usually have you start off. Do you want me to start off with my number 10?
Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah, let's hear your number 10.
My number 10 was not real dominant in the regular season. They actually finished second, 11 games behind the Boston Celtics, who went 68-14. But my number 10 is the 1973 New York Knicks. I know a lot of people would say the 70 team won more games and all this, but the 73 Knicks, you're looking at Willis Reed, Dave DeBusschere, Bill Bradley, Earl Monroe, Walt Clyde Frazier. Off the bench, you had Jerry Lucas, Phil Jackson, Dick Barnett, Dean Miminger, and Henry Bibby. I think it was a lot deeper team than 1970. They actually ended up, I believe they were actually third, I think, in the regular season behind the Baltimore Bullets also. But so they ended up being the third seed in the playoffs, and they ended up beating Baltimore and Boston in the playoffs. Then they went on to beat a great L.A. Laker team in 5 games, coached by one of the most underrated coaches in NBA history, Red Holtzman. That's my number 10.
Yeah, that's a good number 10. What was really impressive about that Knicks team, and I'll get to them a little bit later, was they beat the Celtics, who I believe were 68-14. Yeah, that was a really, really strong Celtics team, and they beat
and that Bullets team. The Bullets team was a really good team, also.
Yeah, good, strong playoff run.
But all right, what's your number 10?
Well, my number 10 is very, very close over there. It was not a real dominant team during the regular season, but really turned it on in the playoffs. The 1973-74 Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics of the 70s featured Dave Cowens. John Havlicek was still really good in 1974. They had Paul Silas, Paul Westphal, JoJo White, and the infamous Don Nelson. Very underrated team. They had 6 guys who and then Paul Westphal came in at 7.2. What was really interesting about them was, the Milwaukee Bucks of the early 70s were very close to a dynasty. They could have been, especially had they gotten Dr. J, because they drafted him. But it was the Celtics in '74. They survived that very famous Game 6, the skyhook by Lou Alcindor, and they went into Milwaukee in Game 7 and blew them out. Just a very, very good, scrappy veteran team, and just top to bottom, great team.
I agree they were a great team. I don't have them in my top 10. The Celtics of those 70s could have been a dynasty right then, too, because they won it in 76 also. And in 73, as we talked before, when the Knicks upset them in the playoffs, they were 68-14.
Exactly.
So, you want to go ahead?
Every reason. Sure. My number 9 team was the 2002-2003 San Antonio Spurs. This was probably the best team of Tim Duncan's career. What was really nice about that is he did have David Robinson on the team. So the Twin Towers together were really good. Manu Ginobili's on this team. Bruce Bowen was a really good defensive player. Tony Parker was coming into his own. Steve Kerr was on the team. Just pretty deep all the way around. And they didn't beat a really impressive Nets team, but this was a team that probably could have given a lot of other teams on this list a real hard time just because you had two of the greatest centers of all time playing on the same team. And you got Greg Popovich, in my opinion, one of the best coaches ever, what he's been able to do in this era. And, the West Coast was pretty strong. You had, Dallas was good. Sacramento was really good. The Lakers were good. And they were able to get to the finals.
I don't have them, man. I had them just missing. I know we discussed that before them, and I think the 2004 Pistons were a really good team also. But my problem was, I think backcourt-wise, outside of the two big guys, I don't think they really match up with any other team that I have on the list. But I could see them being in a top 10. I don't have a problem with it. But my number 9...
Well, as far as the Pistons... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to talk about the Pistons a little bit. The Pistons, I would have had the Pistons, but I felt like, right after the Detroit won their championship in 2004, they got back to the finals in 2005 against those San Antonio Spurs. Now, they didn't have David Robinson, but the Spurs beat them in 7, and I think they were better in 2003. So that was kind of my tiebreaker. Yeah,
actually, they would have been my probably number 11 and 12 teams.
Sure.
And with San Antonio being 11 and Detroit being 12, because when I was looking at it, that was the actual difference of why I put San Antonio over top of Detroit was what happened in 2005, which I know they're different teams, but it's very similar teams.
Very, very similar teams, exactly.
My number 9 are the 1965 Boston Celtics. They had 5 players that were inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame: Casey Jones, Sam Jones, Tommy Heinsohn, Bill Russell, John Havlicek. You got a Hall of Fame coach in Red Auerbach. They went 62-18, won their division, swept through the playoffs. You also had a guy by the name of Satch Sanders, who was a starter because John Havlicek was the sixth man off the bench. Larry Siegfried was a solid player. The Eastern Conference was actually fairly tough that year. There was only one team in their division that didn't have a record above 500. Because you also had a good Sixer team and a very good Cincinnati Royals team with a prime Oscar Robertson, who went 48-32 that year. They came out, they handled it actually took them 7 games to beat Philly. They only beat Philly by a point there. And in the NBA Finals, they pretty much walked right through the Lakers. They beat them in 5 games, 4-1. I think there was only one game in the series that they won was even close. But I just think the fact that you had a Hall of Fame player at every position and a Hall of Fame coach, that they warrant being in the top 10.
Certainly. It gets a little dicey once you go back prior to probably 1970, just because the quality of the league goes down a little bit. The quality of the league really jumped up once Lou Alcindor came aboard, and Pete Maravich and some of those guys. But still, very great team in their own right.
Well, and the thing is this about that. You still had 5 Hall of Fame players that were great players, and that's why, they're the only team I have from before 1970 on this list. And that's why. It's just the quality of players they had. And if they would have had 5 Hall of Fame players in 1985 or 1995, they'd probably be in the top 2 or 3.
Sure.
But my number 8 would be a team close to your heart, or at least your dad's, the 1971 Milwaukee Bucks. They had basically a prime Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You had an older Oscar Robertson. You had Bobby Dandridge, who was a really great player that people don't remember. He averaged 18 points a game that year. They had John McLaughlin, who averaged 16 points. You had power forward Greg Smith. Off the bench, you had Bob Boozer, Dick Cunningham, and Lucius Allen, all very good players. They also had a 20-game winning streak during the season, went 66-16, so won over 80% of their games. So I believe with that roster, what they achieved, the way they played in the regular season, that, they were a deep team. They were 9-10 players deep, and I think they warrant being on the list.
Well, you will have my full agreement on that, because they are also my number 8.
Well, there you go.
71 Bucks. One of the best teams. Alcindor was probably at the peak of his dominance. You watch the footage of him, in the finals or in the regular season. He's a matchup nightmare. And, Oscar Robertson is still very good. Bobby Dandridge, like you said, very underrated, good defender. Greg Smith is actually one of the guys. My dad always called him kind of the igniter. He was the guy that would make a big steal and get the fast break going. He just always seemed to come up with a lot of the intangibles. And then, of course, John McLaughlin. I mean, they had a three-point line back then. I mean, he could shoot from just about anywhere. He was as good a shooter as just about anyone in his era, for sure. Agreed. 66 and 16. They did sit guys down at the end. They really could have made a push for 68, 69, 70 wins. And they were pretty dominant in the playoffs as well, sweeping the Washington Bullets.
All righty. Let's move on to number 7. You want to start us off?
Sure. Number 7, I have the 1973 New York Knicks. Most of the same reasons that you gave. I think Willis Reed was one of the most underrated players in the history of the game. And, just really fundamentally sound team basketball, very deep. Clyde Frazier, the Busher, and Earl Monroe. I mean, it's a very, very deep team. Just like we talked about that run, beating the Celtics. And,
I think you got them a little high, but I don't disagree with it. Since they're in my top 10 list, I really can't tell you you're nuts. So,
right. Well,
go ahead.
I put them past Milwaukee because to me, the Bucks probably could have got there had they won in '74. But the Knicks, this is 2 championships with basically the same squad
and 3 finals in 4 years.
Exactly.
But my number 7 is one that I thought would be higher. It's one of my favorite teams ever. I'm an Indiana Pacer fan. There's no Pacer team I can put in a top 10 list, except maybe top 10 worst team. There's some teams in the early 80s there that could probably make it. But my number 7 is the 1983 Philadelphia 76ers. They acquired Moses Malone, which they replaced Daryl Dawkins, who recently passed away, with Moses Malone, and that pretty much put them over the top. They traded Caldwell Jones for him. Caldwell Jones was a great player, but he wasn't Moses Malone. They were led by the Hall of Famer Julius Erving. Maurice Cheeks, who was an all-star point guard. Andrew Toney, who was a big-time shooting guard, especially any Boston Celtic fans out there realize that. Then they used to call him like the Boston Strangler or something.
Yeah, something like that.
And then they had Bobby Jones, who was consistently one of the best 6 men. They won 65 games in the regular season. The one thing I remember is when they asked Moses Malone what his prediction for the playoffs was, and he goes, "Fo, fo, fo," would mean they were going to sweep everybody. I think they lost 1 game to the Milwaukee Bucks, didn't they?
Yeah, they lost, I think, Game 3 or Game 4 of that series.
And then they came out and they swept the Lakers. The thing I remember about that is I think almost every one of those games, they were down double digits in the first half, came back to win.
Yep.
You look at him, you had Moses Malone, you had Julius Erving, Andrew Toney, Maurice Cheeks, Bobby Jones, Clint Richardson, Franklin Edwards, Clement Johnson, Earl Cureton. They were a deep team. They were so deep they could afford to put Mark Averoni at power forward, which I don't know if he's ever scored a point yet, but I remember he'd play like the first 2 minutes, and then the first time he'd get a foul, they'd bring Bobby Jones in. My reason for not having them higher would probably be, if they would have beat the L.A. Lakers with James Worthy,
yeah,
I think it would have meant maybe moving them up and switching them with my number 16, but they didn't. And to me, I know it's probably unfair to judge it that way, but they didn't call him Big Game James for nothing, one of the greatest big game players in NBA history. And to think that, with those leads, that they couldn't have held the lead at least for a couple games and made the series more competitive with James Worthy, I think that is a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I agree with that. The playoff run was good. It was one of those things where they were always, the 76ers, well, even going back to Bill Walton, they were always very good, but especially in the early 80s when they played, they would beat Boston and go to the finals. They were just not quite as good as the Lakers, and maybe 83 was just one of those down years, and especially without James Worthy.
Well, I mean, you look at the series they play in 80 and 82. They were very competitive. They were 6-game series. But you replaced Daryl Dawkins with Moses Malone, and you took James Worthy out of the lineup from 82.
Right.
Well, Worthy wasn't even on him in 82, though. So Worthy was a rookie in 83 because he played in the 82 championship game with North Carolina.
That's correct. Yes.
So still, basically, the difference is there, the switching Moses Malone for Daryl Dawkins, which I think if you get James Worthy added to the Lakers could offset that a little bit, at least made it more of a competitive series.
Yeah, it would have meant more if James Worthy had been there.
Now, my number 6 are the 1996 Chicago Bulls, which I know a lot of people will have a problem with. But
a little low, but I understand your reasoning.
They were 72-10, which is fine, but...
Fine.
It was fine, but the thing is this. The thing people forget about the 1996 season, I think you also had some expansion teams they got to feast off of, too, which made that a little easier. Plus, I just don't think the competition in the NBA in 1996 was anywhere near what it was the decades before. And I think the glaring weakness on this team, if you compare them to the teams I have above them, is all the other teams had a dominant or very good center, and I just don't see that with the Bulls. I think it's something that could have been taken advantage of. I think Michael Jordan's one of the greatest players that ever lived. Scottie Pippen was a very good player. Tony Kukoc, I think, is one of the most underrated players that I've seen, and that's why I had the 96 team above the 92 team, is I think Kukoc was a great player. He was a tough guy. I mean, I've never been a huge Scottie Pippen fan ever since the 94 game where he basically bailed out against the Knicks. Was it 94 or 95? Yeah, I mean...
That's so disappointing. That sucked.
Yeah, I mean, Scottie Pippen was a great player, but that's why I have him at number 6. I'll let you talk about him more later. I know you know more about the Bulls because you're in love with the Bulls, but... What's your number 6?
I'm more in love with the Celtics, but I do like the Bulls a lot. But my number 6 is the 1989-90 Detroit Pistons. The 89 team won 63 games in the regular season. The 90 team won 59. But I think the difference between the 90 team and the 89 team was the addition of Mark McGuire. They had 5 guys that averaged over double figures, and then Vinnie Johnson came in at 9.8. So basically 6 guys, and Rodman even averaged close to 10. So it's just such a deep squad. One of the deepest teams I've ever seen because their bottom 5 was as good as many teams' starting 5. James Edwards, underrated center. He didn't have an amazing career, but he was really good. Came in with 14.5 points. Big guy, could defend. Bill Laimbeer, 6'11". A lot of times he was a center, but in this particular year, he had the luxury of being power forward. They could get him out in the perimeter to shoot. Not a lot of big men could shoot yet. Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman's Defensive Player of the Year, Mark McGuire. He was averaging well over 20 when he was with the Mavericks. He had Vinnie Johnson, John Sally, Gerald Henderson. Very, very deep team, coached by the great Chuck Daly. Their playoff run. They wiped out Indiana and New York pretty fast. They had the 7-game series with the Bulls, and to me, the best Portland team of that early 90s was the 90 team because they had Drazen Petrovic. And there were a lot of close games, but they won 4 games to 1. To me, very dominant, very physical team. I think they would have given a lot of teams a hard time because of their physicality. All
right. Now, I believe my number 5 is the 89 Pistons.
Okay.
The reason I think the 89 Pistons were better is because you had Rick Mahorn. Mark McGuire was still on the team. I mean, you had Laimbeer, Mahorn, Aguirre.
Oh, I thought he came in 90 for some reason.
No, I think you're getting it mixed up with Adrian Dantley leaving after.
Yeah, Dantley was the one. I knew he was in '89, but I thought Aguirre came
left,
in 90.
I think early in the '89 season. Yeah.
Yeah, they had all kinds of conflict on that team.
Yeah, they traded Dantley for Mark Aguirre, which I think loosened up their offense big time because Dantley was the guy where you go down, you give it to him, he'd roll it around in his hands for like 10 seconds and then make a move.
You're right. I remember this now. They did trade mid-season for him.
Yeah, I think this team was deeper. I think they were, you had Bill Laimbeer, great center. I don't care what anybody says. He could hit the 3 on you. He can punch you in the face, he could roll out of bounds with you and clothesline you. Rick Mahorn.
Mahorn was really good.
And see, the thing is this. I think when you had Laimbeer, Mahorn, Aguirre, Dumars, and Thomas, you had James Edwards, John Sally, Dennis Rodman, Benny Johnson coming off the bench.
Yeah, they were all still there.
Yeah, I mean, they were all there. They swept the Lakers, but the Lakers didn't have Magic. But they took care of Game 1. It looked like they were about to win Game 2, even though Magic was there. I think Michael Cooper might have missed a game or two in that series also. So I don't think they beat a full-strength Lakers, but I think they would have. You look at the playoffs.
You could really go either way on this, but, yeah, I see your point on it. I forgot they still had Aguirre because that, to me, was the difference maker. But, yeah, if Aguirre's there in 89, which he was.
Yeah, and that makes their defense stronger
team.
Because you still had Mahorn also.
Yes, exactly. They're that much deeper.
Yeah, and I mean, the playoffs, they go in, they sweep Boston in 3. They sweep the Milwaukee Bucks in 4. And I mean, almost every game other than Game 4 against Milwaukee was a blowout, I think.
Right. Now, Bird was gone that year, but go ahead.
Yeah, Bird was gone, but I mean, still, they had to play. That's why the Celtics were the 8th seed and the Pistons played them in the first round also.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then they played the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls actually beat them, I think, Game 1 in Detroit. And the Bulls were actually up 2-1 in the series. And then Detroit basically just shut them down because if you look at Chicago, the last 3 games of that series, they scored 80, 85, and
terrible.
94. I mean, they were held down defensively. I mean, Dumars was known as the Jordan killer, which he didn't really kill him, but instead of giving up 30 a game, he was giving up 25 a game.
Right. Yeah, Dumars played him really tough.
Yeah, so, I mean, to me, I think that was the better of the 2 Pistons teams. I think they were both great teams, though, but I just think that was the better one.
Yeah, I totally forgot that Aguirre was 89 and not 90. You're right, because Rick Mahorn makes them that much deeper. I do think they had a more impressive playoff run in 90, especially against that Portland team, but still, it's a horse to tease.
In 90, if you remember, the Bulls took them 7.
And the Bulls did take them 7.
If you look at 89,
no, they took them 7 in 89 too, didn't they? Or was
no, they didn't. It was 6 games because actually it was 2 games to 1 Bulls.
Yeah,
they were playing in Chicago,
right.
And then Detroit wins 3 in a row, 2 of them in Chicago, and I mean the games were like 8-10 point games, but they were games that I don't think were really in too much doubt. So I think the playoff run was also a little bit more impressive, but what the heck? Of course, then again, I think the Bulls were a better team in 90. But
yeah, they were. The Bulls were not very good in 89. They were just happy to be there.
Yeah. Well, it's debatable that they were just happy to be there. Most of the years they played them until the Pistons got old. But
right. Yeah,
your number 5?
My number 5 is the 83-76ers. All the reasons that you gave. As deep of a team as you'll probably ever see. Moses Malone was the MVP of the league. Dr. J was still very good, though he was aging. Bobby Jones was getting up there, but he was still very good. Like we talked about, for this one season, probably the most dominant team in the franchise's history, and definitely ranks among the best.
All right, so that brings us to our top 4, but before we get to that, we got to take a word from our sponsors. Remember to check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. We will be back right after this break for DraftKings.
Only a few more preseason games to go before the regular season kicks off, and you could start the season by winning $2 million in Week 1 at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. It's the biggest fantasy football contest ever. $10 million in prizes are up for grabs, including $2 million for first place and $1 million for second. One-week fantasy means no season-long commitments. It's fantasy football on demand. Play where you want, when you want, with the players you want. Just pick up your players, pile up the points, and pick up the cash. That's it. You've never experienced football like this. Every game feels like the playoffs, even in Week 1. And every broken tackle or spectacular catch can take you closer to a $2 million prize. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code SPREAKER to play for free for a shot at $2 million in the Week 1 Millionaire Maker. Enter Spreaker for free entry now at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com.
And we're back. We're talking to top 10 teams in NBA history with Matt Andruscavage and myself, Mike Goodpaster. And we are up to number 4, which, Matt, I'll go ahead and let you start off with your number 4.
My number 4 is the 95-96 Chicago Bulls. Probably one of the most fun seasons I can ever remember watching the Bulls, just because Jordan's back from his retirement, and he's retakes the league as the league MVP, All-Star Game MVP, Finals MVP, scoring champ, and he was just back as the leader of the NBA. But this Bulls team was a lot different than the first three-peat. The first three-peat, though very good, Jordan basically had to will those teams to victory, over Portland, Phoenix, and the Lakers. But I think the second three-peat, the team itself was better. It was a deeper squad, like you talked about with Tony Kukoc, sixth man of the year. He was a matchup problem. 6'11", the guy could pass like a point guard. He could shoot from anywhere on the court. Ron Harper was really good. He wasn't the same Ron Harper from the Clippers days, but he was still a really good player. He could play defense. They had off the bench, he had Jed Bushler. He'd come in shoot three. Steve Kerr was still really good. Luke Longley, though, he was not a stellar center. He was a good defensive center, especially that particular year. And with Dennis Rodman on the team, hauling down rebounds, he was still a very good defender. You had 4 guys averaging about 10, another guy averaging about 8.5. Jordan's averaging 30. It's 72-10. The great Phil Jackson. As far as the competition that year, I would have to agree. The 96 Sonics, probably the worst team to go to the finals in the 90s that I can think of. And
they might have been
Bulls,
better than the Magic.
The Magic, maybe. It was comparable. At least
they might
they
have
had
been better
Shaq.
than the 91 Lakers. I think the 91 Lakers were pretty terrible, too, once James Worthy gets hurt after Game 1.
Yeah. They kind of got – I still don't know how they beat that.
And the 99 Knicks weren't that good either.
Well, I don't even count 99. It's hard to count that strike season. But the Sonics were really bad. The Bulls would have been a little bit more impressive in the playoffs had Horace Grant been healthy in the conference finals. The 96 Magic team was kind of a shell of the 95 team. The Bulls swept them, but they had a lot of really good winning streaks in the regular season. There were plenty of games where, the Bulls. I remember the one game against the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies were up by like 12 with just a few minutes left, and Jordan scored like 18 in a row to win the game.
Yeah, but the fact that the Grizzlies were winning a game at that point was victory enough for them, probably.
Well, I guess that's just it. I mean, there's gonna, you're gonna have, an 82-game season. You're gonna have a few games where you have some letdowns, and they would most of the time find ways to win. If they lost a game, it was like by a last-second shot, or maybe they missed a last-second shot, and they only lose 10 games. I don't know if we're ever gonna see that again. But because you're gonna the only way to win that, you can only lose 9 games the whole season. I don't know if anyone's ever gonna break that.
My number 4 would be the closest team to it, and it wasn't an expansion year. Can you guess who that is?
Your number 4 team?
Yeah, that's where we're at, right?
Yeah. See, I would think. Well, you said something about expansion. I didn't hear what you said.
No, there was no expansion that year, too. But 68-13, the 1967 Philadelphia 76ers.
Yeah, good team, too.
They had Hal Greer, who averaged 22 a game, Chet Walker and Billy Cunningham, both with 19. Then you had Wilt Chamberlain, who was averaging 25 points, 20 rebounds. And, the thing that made that team so good is Chamberlain always had to basically carry the load for the Philadelphia 76ers. They got him help. They dismissed, I think, Dolph Schayes was the coach. They fired him partway during the offseason. They fired Dolph Schayes. Alex Hannum came in. They had a better draft. They brought some free agents in, and Wilt Chamberlain wasn't expected to hold the team afloat all by himself. And plus, that's the year Wilt Chamberlain made 68% of his shots, which is unreal even for a center back then, even though he was 3 feet taller than everybody else. They started their season 46-4. Still best 50-game start in NBA history. Sat a lot of starters the last 2, even 3 weeks of the season, which is probably why they lost 13 games. Because at one point they were sitting at like 60-6. So to me, it might be the greatest regular season just because if you look, I mean, you had the Knicks, Royals, and Celtics who were all solid teams that they had to play all the time. You know, you go to the NBA Finals, they beat a really good San Francisco team, the Warriors. Took them 6 games to do. Chamberlain was the MVP of the league. They had, I mean, all 5 starters were either first or second team All-NBA that year. And this is a team really I'd forgotten about until I started doing the research. And when you look at it, when you got a team that's got 4 guys averaging 20 points a game pretty much, it's hard to top that.
Yeah, I mean, they were when you think of the 1960s, you think of the great Celtics teams. Later in the decade, the Lakers, even though they could never really get past the Celtics. And then the third team is the 67 76ers. I don't know, once you get past 1970, to me, the competition goes down a little bit.
But you're still talking Chet Walker, Billy Cunningham, you know, I mean, Wilt Chamberlain. I mean, I think those guys could play pretty much any time.
Yeah, overall.
It's not like Wilt Chamberlain would be too small to play today, if you know what I mean.
No, certainly not.
My number 3, since you doubled up one, I'm going to go ahead and double up one. My number 3 is a team that actually won one more game than them. That would be the 1972 LA Lakers, who went 69-13. They also won, I believe, a record 33 straight games that season, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
I mean, you're looking at a team.
It looks like we're going to be in agreement the rest of the way here.
You're looking at a team that's starting lineup was Wilt Chamberlain, Happy Hairston, Jim McMillan, Gail Goodrich, Jerry West, Pat Riley, and them coming off the bench. I mean, that's just a great team. I mean, offensively, they were loaded. They handled the Knicks fairly. I think they beat the Knicks in 5 in 72, didn't they?
Yeah.
And, you know, you're still messing around with a Golden State team that was really good, had been in the finals a few years before, went 51-31. Seattle was actually really good that year, which people forget. I think they won almost 50 games. And then, like I said, they knock off a really good Knicks team in the finals. So.
Yep. Yeah.
So what you got for number 3? The same thing?
Yeah, we're going to be in agreement the rest of the way. The 72 Lakers, you know, they were pretty much the dream team. They might have been the first dream team. Going out and getting Wilt Chamberlain off the Sixers and adding them to an already loaded squad. They were never able to get past the Celtics. You know, as great as Jerry West and Elgin Baylor were, they just were never able to get it done. The most disappointing year had to have been 1969 and the Don Nelson shot. You know, that was an aging Celtics team, and they should have beaten them, but they didn't. So they go out a couple of years later and go get Wilt Chamberlain. You got 6 guys averaging over 10, 2 guys averaging over 25 in Jerry West and Gail Goodrich. And with Wilt Chamberlain on the team, you can match up now with every big man, no problem. And the other thing about them is everyone forgets the Milwaukee Bucks were in the Western Conference, and the Lakers had to beat them to go to the finals. 4-2, they knocked off the world champs. And, the Bucks were the team that ended that 33-game winning streak. So they matched up with them really well, but when push came to shove, the Lakers were just more of a stacked team. And you put in the fact that they were the team that won the 69 games. It stood for a very long time. Has to be considered one of the very best of teams in the history of the game.
All righty, go ahead to number 2, which I think I know pretty much that you're going to talk about one team for 2, and I guess I'll talk about one team about 1, and we'll share our thoughts.
All righty, yeah. The 1986-87 Lakers are my number 2. Just top to bottom. Look at this team. You got league MVP Magic Johnson. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is still averaging about 20 a game. James Worthy, if he's not a top 3 to top 5 power forward, I don't know how you keep him out of that, but he's fantastic. You got Byron Scott, Michael Cooper, who could do pretty much everything, Michael Thompson coming off the bench, Kurt Rambis coming off the bench, just loaded, top to bottom. This was probably the crown jewel of that decade as far as their best team winning the best of the 5 championship teams of that decade to the Lakers.
And I think a case can be made that you could actually take the second 5 of Wes Matthews, who was a good point guard.
Yeah.
Michael Cooper, shooting guard. Billy Thompson at strong forward. Kurt Rambis at power forward. And Michael Thompson at center. And probably jump in as a 7 or 8 seed in the playoffs that year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's possible. That is definitely possible.
I mean, it was a great team. They tore apart an old Celtic team that was beat up and injured. But they were still a great team. I mean, if you look at it in the playoffs, they come out, and I think the only game they lost in the playoffs, if I remember, was the Sleepy Floyd game.
Yep, the Golden State Warriors
Sleepy
game
played
4.
For Golden State, and I think it was like game 3 or 4 of that series. Sleepy dropped like 50 or 55 points on them, and they won that game.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it, the
What
Lakers...
a great game that was.
Hey, the Lakers swept the Nuggets in 3 games, scoring 120, 139, 140. They come out and they beat Golden State in 5 games, scored 125, 116, 133, 129, 118. The Western Conference Finals, they scored 133, 122, 112, and 92. And, I mean, they just – if you look at it, the series against Denver, no close games at all. Against Golden State, you had the 1 game that they lost, no close games other than that. And then you've got the Seattle series. Game 1, I think, was relatively close. I think it was like a 5-point game.
Yeah, there's a couple of close games there.
But, I mean, the second game was an 8-point game, but that was more of a 15. They got closed 8 in the last minute. I think the game in Seattle, Game 3, was a close game. But the Game 4, I mean, the thing that impressed me about this team is they played their best games when they had a chance to clinch. They beat Denver 140 to 103. They beat Golden State 118 to 106. They beat Seattle 133 to 102. I mean, and then in the finals, they beat Boston 106 to 93 in the deciding game. And I mean, really, that's a series that, you know, without the Game 3, I mean, that series could easily have been a sweep.
Oh,
Game 3
right.
is the game Boston won 109 to 103.
Yep.
But, I mean, if you look at these guys, they were just really good. I mean, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Byron Scott Green, Michael Cooper, A.C. Green, Kurt Rambis, Michael Thompson. I mean, they had Frank Mikowski for a while, too. And any team that had Frank Mikowski is tough to deal with.
Yeah, I remember when he came to the Bucks. Oh, my goodness.
He wasn't a terrible player. He could get some rebounds.
No, he's a role player.
Yeah. Just not a very big role.
Right.
All right, my number 1, which I think we agree on, would be the 1986 Boston Celtics. They won 67 games. They went 40-1 at home, which was like 37-1 at the Garden, 3-0 at the Hartford Civic Center. The only team that ever won more games was that 73 team we talked about that won 68 in a year. Larry Bird won his 3rd consecutive MVP. Bill Walton was the 6th man of the year, which people forget. Bill Walton played a huge role on that team.
He wasn't just sitting there. He was very good.
Yeah. And, I mean, if you look at their lineup, I mean, you're looking Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson. That's 4 Hall of Famers. Off the bench, Bill Walton's a Hall of Famer. If you look at it, Danny Ainge was an NBA All-Star. Scott Wedman, when he played at Kansas City, was one of the highest scorers in the league for a few years. And, I mean, you got Jerry
Sam Vincent was good.
Huh?
Even Sam Vincent was good.
Yeah, you had Jerry Sheesting, who was an NBA All-Star with the Pacers once or twice. Rick Carlisle. I think Carlisle played in almost every game that year. He averaged 2.6 points. You had Greg Kite, who was just a big, goofy dude. But what are you going to do? Every NBA team in the 80s had one big, tall, white, goofy dude that nobody knew why he was on the team. But
Randy Brewer was our guy.
I always figured, you had Randy Brewer. I mean, all these teams had one big, goofy, white guy that sat on the end of the bench, and you always figured that he probably had a picture of, like, Casey Jones with another man or something. Come on, that was funny, even though it was not right. All right, but they go to the NBA playoffs. They sweep the Bulls, which, I mean, that was basically just Michael Jordan back then. But they go and they won 4-1 over a really good Atlanta team with Dominique Wilkins.
Yep.
The Milwaukee Bucks were a very good team, and they totally dominated the Bucks. I don't even think there might have been like one close game in that series. They go to the finals.
They killed them.
They had a little bit of trouble against Houston when they were in Houston, but they pulled one out. All the games in Boston were butt kickings, if I remember. I think they were all double digits.
Oh, yeah. They were up like 30 in a couple of those games.
Yeah. But like I said, you've got Robert Parrish as the starting center. Bill Walton's the backup. Hell, Greg Kite's the third guy. Greg Kite would have been, probably a starter on a couple of them Bulls teams, man.
No question.
You got Kevin McHale at power forward, Larry Bird at strong forward. You got Danny Ainge at the shooting guard, backed up by Scott Webman and Rick Carlisle. At point guard, you got Dennis Johnson, backed up by Jerry Sheesting and Sam Vincent.
Yep.
I mean, Larry Bird, I think that was his greatest year. He was the Finals MVP, third straight MVP of the league. He was the Associated Press Athlete of the Year, All-NBA first team. McHale was All-NBA first defensive team. Dennis Johnson was All-NBA second defensive team. Bill Walton was the NBA Sixth Man of the Year.
Yeah, it just does not get really better than that. The thing I like about them, they could have, if they were having trouble, you bring Wedman in, and Wedman will have one of those 18 to 20-point games.
He did it, I think, in the 85 finals, didn't he, where he had a huge game? I think one of those games, or it might have been even 87 where he had the big game. But I know there was one of them where he came in and he dropped like 24 coming off the bench. I think it was game 1 of 85, the game where they beat the Lakers.
The Memorial Day Massacre?
14. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, really, my 1 and my 2 here could be interchanged, and I would not have a problem with it. The 86 Celtics and the 87 Lakers, in my opinion, were the two best teams that I've ever seen.
Yeah, no question about it. About the 87 Lakers, I think one of the best moments of that, I remember seeing this. They played, now granted it was against Sacramento, it was a regular season game. The Lakers were just so much better than everybody else. They go up 29-0 on Sacramento in the first quarter, and I remember Sacramento, they missed a couple of free throws, and they finally make one.
48-4 at one point.
It was ridiculous. I remember the crowd just went banana. It's a Laker crowd. They go bananas when the Kings make a free throw. It was like 29-1. Yeah, I think they're up like 40-4 or 48-4
at the end of the first quarter or something. But I mean, that was a team that once they started running on you,
like that.
Yeah, once they started running on you, your ass was done because there was no way to stop.
No doubt.
And it happened to the Lakers in the final, or to the Celtics in the finals in '87. So I mean, to me, these are probably my 1 and 1A.
Yeah, I would have to agree. The thing that really made these teams special is their ability to play any style. They could play the setup game. They could play. They could run. They could. They had really good shooting, really good defense, 3-point shooting, and they would blow any team away.
Yeah, I mean, they both had Hall of Fame point guards. Dennis Johnson is one of the most underrated point guards ever lived, I think.
Yep. They both had so much size too.
Defensively, 1984, the job he did on Magic Johnson when they put him on Magic starting in Game 4 was just, I mean, it was the difference in that series. 1985, they lost the series, but if you remember, he hit the big shot at the buzzer in the Forum when they were down 2-1 to tie that series at 2.
Yes.
I mean, he was a big-time player, great defensive player. I guess we got our top 10 NBA teams done.
Yep. I don't think there's any question. As much as I like Jordan's Bulls, Julius's 76ers, you got to put the 87 Lakers and 86 Celtics as 1 and 2. There's just no. I don't think there's any way you can possibly.
Well, I mean, that's the reason why when you think NBA, especially if you're above the age of probably 40, the first 2 names you think are Lakers, Celtics, Bird, and Magic.
Absolutely. No
and
question.
It's not a shot at Jordan. It's just if you
that they were the guys that changed the league. They revitalized.
They were the guys that saved the league because I remember. Yeah. 1979 was there ever a bigger college basketball game than Magic against Bird? And I mean the thing was this: it wasn't just it was Magic against Bird. It was Indiana State against Michigan State. Neither one of those schools, until Bird and Magic got there, ever even dreamed of going to a Final Four. And let's face it, Indiana State, since he left, hasn't either.
Well, you live in Indiana. Has Indiana State ever done anything since?
We made the tournament and won a game a few years ago. I actually went to Indiana State, so I take a little bit of umbrage of that. But
well, I'm just saying, I'm giving credit to Bird there.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that they both took schools to the finals that had never been there before. And then if you look at it, I remember, like, I really liked watching. I always loved the Sixers in the early 80s because, let's face it, my Pacers were not going to be in the playoffs. But I remember, like, 1980 Game 6 where Magic plays center and wins the championship.
Yep.
It was on freaking tape delay. I remember going out to eat with my parents and, you know, not letting them turn a radio on or anything because I didn't want to hear a score because I wanted to stay up, watch the game on CBS at 11:30 at night to see who won. I was very disappointed in the result, too, and very tired in this morning. But
I
they
was
say
still Magic Johnson's greatest game.
Yeah, 1981, the finals were still tape delayed on a lot of the games, especially like the Friday night games. I remember the only games seeing live a lot of times were the games on the weekend during the day. So I think Bird and Magic changed that. I mean, Bird and Magic made the NCAA March Madness what it is today, and they turned the NBA into what the NBA became.
Right, and then later on, Jordan kind of took it to another level, but it was Bird and Magic that.
But the thing is,
the NBA was really struggling in the late 70s. They had all kinds of problems.
Without Bird and Magic, there may never be a Jordan to the extent Jordan was Jordan.
I totally agree with that.
You know, it's just
Bird
like when
Magic
people talk about the greatest player of all time, that's fine. You could call that Michael Jordan. But the most significant player, or the most significant players of all time, were Magic and Bird.
Bird and Magic. Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. No doubt. And the more I watch Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, those are the three greatest players of all time in my book.
Well, and the thing is this, we'll have to do a show about the 10
things.
greatest NBA players, but the one thing that always stands in my mind was this. My son always asked me who was better when he was like 7 or 8 and started playing basketball. He asked me, was Jordan the greatest player ever? Was Bird the greatest player ever? Because he has that question because we're from Indiana. And the thing is this. He went and watched YouTube videos. This had been like 6-7 years ago. And he comes back to me, and he says, the one thing I noticed is this. When I watched the highlight films of Bird and Magic, probably 80% of their greatest plays were passing the ball to their teammates.
Yeah. Well, they also had a lot better players.
With Jordan, 80% of it was him just dunking, though.
Right. Well, that's because there is reasons for that. A lot of Jordan's greatest highlights.
Well, wait a second. I don't want to hear that.
Anybody around him.
Over half of his career, though, he played with teams that won 6 championships.
Yeah, but a lot of his highlights that are shown in videos are from 1987 to 1990.
Yeah, but even his highlights that are shown in the 90s, Matt, are usually dunks. Or the game where he got hot hitting the threes against the Trailblazers, which even shocked him. So.
Well, he was not a three-point shooter at that time. He became a three-point shooter the year after.
He never was a three-point shooter. He got to the point where he could shoot them, and you would have to respect him.
Yeah, he was.
I don't think he could ever call it. He wasn't a three-point shooter like a Bird or a Reggie Miller.
No, he wasn't a Bird or a Reggie Miller.
Yeah, he was kind of like Dr. J when he had to develop a jump shot because he could no longer just dunk it over everybody every play.
Right.
He did.
Right.
Now, he developed it better than Dr. J did, but, I mean, Dr. J became a decent shooter also.
Yeah.
I mean, Jordan was better than decent. Jordan was a good shooter by the time he got to the end of his career. So, but it's just kind of the same comparison. When he had to change because, you know, he got a little bit older, he could. It's what made him one of the greatest players that ever lived.
You know, but in fairness to him, you know, Bird comes in, and I agree, you know, that, you know, Bird he's much more of a point guard. He's much more of a setup guy in a lot of ways than Jordan is.
The thing about Bird Magic is you could play him at any position on the court.
Well, yeah, that's because of their height as well.
Yeah.
But they both also came into winning organizations. Both of those players had much better players around them early in their careers. Pippen, yeah, they might have got Pippen in 88 or whatever, but he didn't get good till like 4 years later, and even then, he wasn't, you know, James Worthy.
We've had this debate before. He would have got better quicker with Magic or Bird around him, though, because they would have went out of their way to make him better.
Yeah, maybe that's true.
But
something we'll never know.
This sounds like a debate for next week's NBA show, so
perfect.
We'll save it till then. Hey, real quick, we only got like a week until the NFL season kicks off or a week from tomorrow night.
Week from tomorrow, yep.
I think next Wednesday we're going to have Eris Persidius from Gridiron Mo on the show to basically run down everything Gridiron Mo can do, tell you how to upload it on Android and the iPhone, so you don't have to just be the Apple Store like it was last year when it was released. I mean, this is going to be a great app. I think maybe next Thursday night, me and Matt need to sit down and play each other in it also.
Sounds good to me.
That way
Pittsburgh, New England.
In the game, so I don't fall asleep. If I fall asleep, does that count as a loss, though?
Well, if it's
to my
not
Bengals,
Tom Brady, it might be boring.
Is Tom Brady going to play?
I think he will. I think Judge is going to rule in his favor, but that's another subject.
But, all right. Hey, and remember, Sunday morning you'll be able to catch an NFL preview and prediction show with myself, Matt, and former All-Pro Jacksonville Jaguar offensive lineman and Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl lineman Leon Searcy. So that should be a good show.
Yep.
Next week we got Randall Morris.
Yep, Randall Morris will be on our football
Seattle
show.
Seahawk. He was the backup to Kurt Warner. Our boxing show next Tuesday night, we've got former middleweight champion of the world, Winky Wright, which I'm really excited about, and Matt has no clue who that is because Matt doesn't watch boxing. We will also.
I just helped you get him. I don't know. I didn't get to watch him fight though.
So much. Also, at some point next week, we will have a San Francisco 49er weekly show previewing the 49ers' first game with Matt and Dexter Carter and probably a special guest.
Hoping to get Brian Johnny.
Okay, well, you're going to pipe down now. Yeah, whatever. You got some 49ers. Everybody wants to hear the next announcement because I know I get like thousands of tweets a day wanting to know when the Cincinnati Bengals show will start.
Perfect.
That will start next week because, Bengal fans don't worry about this preseason crap because it's boring. We just worry about the regular season. We don't worry about the postseason either because we're going to lose then. But we just worry about the regular season. So I think our show this year will be like 17, 18 weeks. We're going to cut it off if we go to the playoffs and not even think about it. So, But former Bengals Super Bowl linebacker Joe Kelly will be my co-host for that show. So keep an eye out for all of them. Make sure you check out The Grueling Truth on Facebook. Go like the page. Check out the website, www.gruelingtruth.com. What am I forgetting here? Matt, you can be followed at what on Twitter?
MTA Scavage.
And I can be followed at RiverMonster11. So you got any final words for us tonight, Matt?
Good top 10 list. I actually thought we were going to have more disagreement than what we did, but a lot of great teams, good analysis. Always, I like top 10 lists. It's just fun, good times.
Well, why don't we do them? But so make sure you check out all the Grueling Truth shows. They'll pop up daily. Make sure you go give them a listen. Check out the Grueling Truth Facebook page, and our new logo will be up when, Matt?
Shortly.
Okay.
I credit my friend DeMille.
I forgot to bring it up to you. So, who was it that did the logo?
My friend DeMille Hunt. He's a very good graphic designer, a good friend of mine from Alabama, and he was good enough to take care of a logo for us.
Yeah, maybe you ought to have him as a guest on the 49er show for doing that.
I think he'd love that.
Because I know he's a 49er fan because I see him post
all
the time. Yeah, I know. I feel sorry for that guy.
What makes him so cool.
But so we would like to give a special thanks to DeMille Hunt for helping us out with our new artwork logo there. So we will catch you guys next time, which will be shortly. Like I said, just keep an eye out on the Grueling Truth Facebook page. Go give it a like. But for Matt Andruscavage, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.